This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
In the African American community, we might have a much greater problem.
What?
Segregation required the middle class and the poor kids to be together.
Okay.
And there was a cross-fertilization that went on.
Okay.
We learned from those middle class kids
Okay.
things that our parents didn't know. And those middle class parents worked for us indirectly because we benefited from whatever they did for their kids. 1963 to 1969 was a golden period for African Americans.
How so?
There was a lot of change going on in civil rights, fulfillments of civil rights. There was a lot of conflict. I mean, there were 3 major deaths during that period. So there was a lot of change in America. There was a lot of hope. There were a lot of ideas. There were lots of African Americans going to college. And they were new at college, and they grew. What is different now is that the poor people don't have an opportunity to cross-fertilize with middle-class blacks because most of the middle class and above blacks live in the suburbs. And poor people are isolated in the cities. They come in contact with social workers, they come in contact with teachers, but they don't come in contact with real people they could see as much as we did. The one thing about putting all the poor people in one area that's good is they create support systems for themselves.
Okay.
Now, the impact on that community is not good because you have all those poor people there.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword, and they find each other. One of the most difficult things I had to learn was that middle class and above African Americans see the world, in some cases, different than poor people.
How so?
They had to grow up they grew up with stuff. We grew up without stuff. There's an intersecting point that is important, and there's a structural element that we have to deal with.
Okay.
And I'll say, if we don't deal with it, this country is going to fail.
Okay.
And it's not going to just fail, it's going to collapse. It's called structural racism.
Okay.
And the evidence of structural racism is all the disadvantages that African Americans and the disparities in statistics. There is no statistic that any other ethnic group on the disparity side beats African Americans at. I can predict by 3rd or 4th grade how kids are going to come out. And if certain things don't happen to change that, this is the way they're going. It's even worse now than when I was growing up because we had model speed programs. We had support programs. We had teachers in schools who really cared about the kids. People don't care as much about kids now. It's high-stakes tests. It's political realities. It's not we want to change things to make things work anymore. It's just let me get through it. There are young African Americans walking around with less than a 15,000 word vocabulary. That portends the highest arc that they can go. So what do?
Yeah, what do you do?
I start with education, I start with health care.
Okay.
And I start with family structure. There are certain families that if you send those kids back to them, the cycle's not going to be broken. African American males graduating from Ivy League schools have a higher suicide rate than other African American males.
Why? Any hint of a reason why?
Because they stay in that bubble for 4 years and then they get out in the real world and they can't cut it. Because the real world doesn't treat them like that bubble. I can say to you in four instances today, even at my age, where I've run into what I could internalize as racism. And every time you come into a room as a successful African American, you constantly have to prove yourself. Everybody talked about Jeremiah Wright. But African American preachers like Jeremiah Wright are very important because they give us coping mechanisms to deal with racism. They give us other support systems inside their church to help us deal with racism. I was at a meeting in Franklin County, and everybody was complaining about poverty.
Okay.
And how are we going to stop poverty? You know what I said to them?
What?
Let's take all the social work money that y'all pay, give me all the prison money that y'all pay, and give me half of the education money, and let's just give it to the people. We can't afford to continue to carry poverty at the rate that we're carrying poverty. Because the Democratic Party is not liberal enough or willing to put the type of resources into black candidates. Yes, I said it. Black folk are the most intelligent people on God's earth about public policy. They see When people do things for them, they support those people.
Okay.
All right. The problem with the Republican Party, and even the problem with the Democratic Party, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent. Okay. The problem with the Democratic Party and with the Republican Party, they see them as votes rather than as people. If you want to get something done in state government, you got to put a little money on the table.
Okay.
And if you don't have no money on the table, you don't get nothing.
Okay.
Every form of government in the United States, county, state, city, township, federal, all function the same way. We call it a political contribution. The Democratic Party is cruel to African Americans.
How so?
They always tell us we have no place else to go.
Gosh.
But they do.
Where?
They say, oh, you're not going to vote for them Republicans. So they treat us like you have no place else to go.
So where else do you go? Home?
That's right.
You just stay home.
You stay home. Now, one day we're going to do that. And they're going to learn the lesson, but it's going to be too late for them.
Okay.
And you know, I've heard these discussions. As a young pup growing up, I didn't say much. But as an adult, I don't take that. I say, you are being cruel to me, and you don't care about me by saying that. And that's disrespectful.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.